The smell of lavender sachets mixed with mothballs filled my lungs as darkness closed around me like a suffocating blanket. My arthritic hands pressed against the locked door, feeling for the handle that wouldn't turn no matter how desperately I twisted it. The click of Veronica's stilettos echoed down the hallway, growing fainter with each step, followed by her sharp laugh that cut through the house like broken glass. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Enjoy your time out, Winnie, she had hissed through the door before walking away, leaving me trapped in what used to be my own guest room closet. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was locked in a space barely larger than a coffin, surrounded by winter coats that smelled like the life I used to live when this house was still mine. My heart hammered against my ribs as I realized she wasn't coming back anytime soon. The digital clock on the dresser outside cast a faint green glow under the door crack, and I watched the minutes tick by. 1 hour. 2 hours. 3. Each breath became more precious as the air grew stale, and my chest tightened with panic. But what Veronica didn't know, what nobody in this house knew, was that behind the false wall in my bedroom closet sat something that would change everything. And after tonight, after being treated like a prisoner in the home I had built with my own 2 hands, I was finally ready to use it. The morning light streaming through the kitchen window felt like a mockery. As I sat at the breakfast table, my hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. My name is Winifred Scott, though most people call me Winnie, and at 73 years old I never imagined I'd be living as a guest in my own home. The house around me buzzed with the familiar sounds of morning routine, but none of it felt like mine anymore. Veronica breezed into the kitchen wearing a silk robe that probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. She moved through the space like she owned it, which I suppose she did now, at least on paper. Her manicured fingers drummed against the marble countertop as she scrolled through her phone, completely ignoring my presence. "Morning, Mother Scott," she said without looking up, her voice dripping with a kind of false sweetness that made my stomach turn. The way she emphasized the word mother made it sound like an insult rather than a term of endearment. I forced a smile that felt like swallowing glass. "Good morning, dear. Sleep well?" The words came out automatically, a remnant of the politeness my own mother had drilled into me decades ago. She finally glanced up, her ice blue eyes scanning me with the kind of judgment usually reserved for something unpleasant stuck to the bottom of a shoe. "Oh, you know how it is. The walls in this old house are so thin. Every little creak and groan keeps me awake." Her smile was sharp enough to cut diamond. "Maybe it's time we looked into some renovations." The threat hung in the air between us like smoke. Renovations meant changes, and changes meant finding reasons to make my small corner of this house even smaller. I'd already been moved from the master bedroom to the tiny guest room when they took over the mortgage payments last year. Now she was eyeing the breakfast nook where I liked to sit and read my morning paper, the sunroom where I kept my plants, and probably every other space where I might find a moment of peace. "The house has good bones," I said carefully, running my finger along the rim of my coffee cup. "Your father-in-law and I built it to last." Her expression hardened at the mention of Harold, my late husband who had passed 5 years ago. She'd never met him, but she resented his memory the way some people resent rain on their wedding day, as if his very existence had somehow inconvenienced her. "Marcus and I have been talking," she continued, and my heart sank. Whenever my son and his wife had been talking, it usually meant bad news for me. "We think it might be time for you to consider other living arrangements. You know, somewhere more suited to your needs." Other living arrangements. The euphemism made my blood run cold. I knew exactly what she meant by that. Some sterile assisted living facility where I'd wither away surrounded by strangers who couldn't care less about my stories or my history. Where I'd become just another elderly woman parking in front of a television, waiting for visiting hours that would come less and less frequently. "I'm perfectly fine here," I said, though my voice sounded smaller than I intended. "This is my home." Veronica's laugh was like ice cracking. "Technically, it's Marcus's home now. And mine, of course." She held up her left hand, letting the morning light catch the enormous diamond on her ring finger. "We're newlyweds, after all. We need our space to start our own family." The word newlyweds stung more than she probably realized. Marcus and Veronica had been married for barely 8 months, a whirlwind romance that had swept my son off his feet and left me feeling like an unwanted piece of furniture in the process. She was 15 years younger than his 42 years, with the kind of beauty that turned heads and emptied bank accounts. "Where is Marcus this morning?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. My son worked early shifts at the medical device company, where he'd climbed his way up to regional manager, leaving me alone with his wife most mornings. "Conference call with the West Coast," Veronica said, already bored with the conversation. "He'll be tied up for hours." She set down her phone and really looked at me for the first time, her gaze calculating. "You know, Winnie, I think today might be a good day for you to start going through some of your things. Decluttering, you know? We could donate whatever you don't really need." My chest tightened. "What kinds of things?" "Oh, just the usual clutter that accumulates over the years. Old clothes, books, knickknacks." She waved her hand dismissively. "Things that just take up space without serving any real purpose." I thought about the photo albums tucked away in my bedroom, filled with pictures of Marcus growing up, of Harold and me on our anniversary trips, of family Christmases and birthday parties. I thought about my mother's china set, carefully wrapped and stored in the attic, waiting for a special occasion that seemed less and less likely to come. I thought about Harold's war medals, my grandmother's jewelry, the handwritten letters from my sister who had passed away last spring. "I'll think about it," I said, which we both knew meant no. Veronica's smile turned predatory. "Actually, I think today would be perfect. I've already called a donation truck to come by this afternoon. It would be such a shame to waste their time." The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. She hadn't asked or discussed it with Marcus. She'd simply decided that my belongings were disposable and arranged for their removal as if I were already gone. "You can't do that," I said, standing up so quickly that my coffee cup rattled against the saucer. "Those are my things. My memories." "And they're in Marcus's house," she replied smoothly, "taking up Marcus's space. I'm sure he wouldn't want his mother clinging to the past when there's so much future to look forward to." The way she said clinging to the past made it sound pathetic and desperate, as if loving my memories was some kind of character flaw, as if the life I'd lived before she arrived was somehow less important than the life she was planning. "I need to call Marcus," I said, reaching for my phone. "He's in meetings all day," Veronica said quickly. "I wouldn't want to bother him with something so trivial." She stood up and moved closer, her presence somehow making the large kitchen feel claustrophobic. "Besides, wouldn't it be nice to surprise him? Show him how cooperative you're being?" The word cooperative hung between us like a noose. I realized then that this wasn't really about decluttering or making space. This was about power, about
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
establishing once and for all who was in charge of this household. She wanted me to voluntarily surrender the last pieces of my independence, to prove that I would obey her commands even when they broke my heart. "I won't do it," I said, my voice stronger now. "I won't throw away my life to make you more comfortable." Something dark flashed across her face, gone so quickly I almost missed it. When she spoke again, her voice was honey over broken glass. "Well, that's unfortunate. I was hoping we could handle this like adults." She turned and walked toward the living room, leaving me standing alone in the kitchen with my cold coffee and the growing certainty that this was far from over. I could hear her moving around upstairs, and the sound of drawers opening and closing made my stomach clench with dread. 20 minutes later, she came back downstairs carrying a small suitcase and wearing an outfit that suggested she was going somewhere. "I have some errands to run," she announced. "While I'm gone, why don't you reconsider what we discussed? I'd hate for this to become unpleasant." The threat was clear, though I couldn't quite figure out what form it might take. I nodded because it seemed safer than arguing, and watched through the window as she drove away in the little red convertible that Marcus had bought her as a wedding gift. For a few precious hours, the house was mine again. I walked through the rooms slowly, remembering what they had looked like when Harold and I first moved in 35 years ago. The living room where we'd hosted Christmas dinners and birthday parties. The kitchen where I'd taught Marcus to make pancakes on Saturday mornings. the master bedroom where Harold had taken his last breath, holding my hand and telling me he loved me. All of it was different now. Veronica had redecorated with cold, modern furniture that looked expensive but felt unwelcoming. The family photos had been replaced with abstract art that meant nothing to anyone. Even the smell was wrong. Her perfume and cleaning products had erased the scent of the life Harold and I had built together. I ended up in my small bedroom, sitting on the narrow bed that barely fit in the space that used to be Harold's study. My belongings were crammed into a single dresser and a closet that was barely big enough for my winter coats. It was a far cry from the spacious bedroom I'd shared with my husband, but it was still mine. Or so I thought. When Veronica returned that afternoon, she wasn't alone. I heard unfamiliar voices in the driveway and looked out to see a truck marked Helping Hands Donation Center parked behind her car. My heart started racing as I realized she'd gone ahead with her threat, donation truck and all. "Winnie," she called from downstairs, her voice sickeningly cheerful. "Could you come down here, please? I have some lovely people here to help us with the decluttering." I gripped the doorframe of my bedroom, feeling dizzy. She'd actually done it. She'd arranged for strangers to come into my home and take away my belongings without even waiting for my consent. The sheer audacity of it left me speechless. "Winnie?" she called again, and this time there was an edge to her voice that made my skin crawl. I made my way downstairs on unsteady legs, holding tight to the railing. In the living room, two men in work clothes were standing next to several empty boxes, waiting for instructions. Veronica stood between them like a general commanding her troops, that same predatory smile playing around her lips. "There you are," she said when she saw me. "I was just explaining to James and Roberto here that we're doing some spring cleaning. They're going to help us load up some of the older items that we don't really need anymore." "Mrs. Scott?" one of the men said, looking between Veronica and me with obvious confusion. "Which items did you want us to take?" I opened my mouth to tell them there had been a mistake, that I hadn't authorized any donation pickup, but Veronica cut me off smoothly. "Oh, Winnie gets a bit confused sometimes," she said with a laugh that made my blood boil. "Senior moments, you know how it is. I'm handling the arrangements for the family." The casual way she dismissed me as mentally incompetent was like a slap across the face. I saw the exact moment when the workers decided to believe her over me. After all, she was younger, well-dressed, and spoke with the confidence of someone who belonged in this expensive house. "Actually," I said, my voice louder than I intended, "there's been a misunderstanding. I didn't authorize—" "Winnie, sweetie," Veronica interrupted, moving closer and placing a hand on my arm that felt more like a restraint than a comfort. "Remember what we talked about this morning? About being cooperative?" The word hit me like a physical blow. She was reminding me of our earlier conversation, making it clear that my resistance would be seen as evidence of my supposed confusion. The donation workers watched this exchange with the awkward discomfort of people who'd stumbled into a family dispute. "Maybe we should come back another time," James suggested, clearly picking up on the tension. "Nonsense," Veronica said quickly. "Winnie's just having a difficult day. Sometimes change is hard for older people, you understand." She smiled at them conspiratorially, as if they were all adults dealing with a difficult child. I felt trapped, cornered by her manipulation, and my own inability to prove that I was mentally competent without sounding exactly like someone who wasn't. If I protested too much, I'd seem paranoid. If I didn't protest enough, they'd take my belongings and leave me with nothing. "Why don't we start with the guest room?" Veronica suggested, her hand still gripping my arm. "There's so much clutter up there that really should go to people who can use it." The guest room. My room. My last sanctuary in this house that used to be mine. "No," I said firmly, pulling away from her grasp. "Absolutely not. Those are my personal belongings." "Winnie." Veronica's voice carried a warning now, the false sweetness cracking like thin ice. "Let's not make this more difficult than it needs to be." "I'm not making anything difficult," I shot back, my voice rising. "I'm telling you that you cannot take my things without my permission." The two workers exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with the escalating situation. "Look, ladies," Roberto said, "maybe we should." "Actually," Veronica said, her voice suddenly icy calm, I think Winnie needs a moment to collect herself. Sometimes, when she gets overwrought like this, a little quiet time helps her think more clearly. Before I realized what was happening, she was guiding me toward the stairs with a firm grip on my elbow. "Why don't you rest for a bit while we get started? You can come down when you're feeling more rational." I tried to resist, but she was stronger than she looked, and the workers were watching with expressions that suggested they thought she was being remarkably patient with a difficult elderly woman. By the time I understood her intention, we were already at the top of the stairs. "This is insane," I said, but my voice sounded weak even to my own ears. "Marcus will hear about this when he gets home." "Marcus trusts me to handle household matters," Veronica replied smoothly, steering me toward my bedroom. "He specifically asked me to help you with the decluttering. He's concerned about you, Winnie. We all are." The lie was so smooth, so perfectly crafted, that for a moment I almost doubted my own memory of our morning conversation. But then I remembered the look in her eyes when she'd told me about the donation truck, the satisfaction she'd taken in my distress. "He didn't say that," I said, but she was already opening my bedroom door and pushing me inside. "Just rest for a while," she said, and before I could react, she'd stepped back into the hallway and closed the door behind her. The click of the lock turning was the most terrifying sound I'd ever heard. I threw myself against the door, turning the handle frantically, but it wouldn't budge. She'd actually locked me in my own bedroom like a prisoner, like a child being punished for bad behavior. The humiliation was almost as suffocating as the fear. "Veronica!" I called out, pounding on the door with my fists. "Open this door right now!" Her voice came through the wood, muffled but clear. "Just until you calm down, Winnie. I'll let you out when the donation people are finished." I heard her footsteps moving away, followed by the sound of voices downstairs as she returned to direct the removal of my belongings. My belongings. The things that connected me to Harold, to Marcus's childhood, to the life I'd built over 7 decades on this earth. I sank onto my bed, my hands shaking with rage and helplessness. Through the thin walls, I could hear the workers moving around, their footsteps heavy on the stairs as they began carrying boxes out to their truck. Each trip they made felt like another piece of my soul being torn away. But then, as I sat there in my locked room, my eyes fell on something Veronica didn't know about. Something that would change everything if I could just figure out how to get out of here and use it. Behind my closet, hidden by a false wall that Harold had installed during one of his many home improvement projects, was a space that contained more than just memories. It contained the solution to every problem Veronica thought she was creating for me. I just had to survive long enough to reach it. The afternoon stretched on endlessly as I listened to the sounds of my life being dismantled piece by piece. Every creak of the floorboards, every bang and scrape from downstairs felt like a knife being twisted in my chest. I tried calling Marcus from my cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail, just as Veronica had predicted. Hours passed. The sun moved across my small window, casting shadows that grew longer and darker as evening approached. My throat was dry, my bladder full, but I refused to give Veronica the satisfaction of hearing me beg to be let out for basic human needs. Finally, as the last light of day was fading, I heard the donation truck start up and drive away. The house fell silent except for the sound of Veronica's footsteps as she moved around downstairs, probably admiring the newly emptied spaces where my memories used to live. When she finally unlocked my door, I was sitting on my bed with my hands folded in my lap, trying to project a dignity I didn't feel. She leaned against the doorframe with that same predatory smile, looking me over like she was assessing the damage she'd inflicted. "Feel better?" she asked, as if I'd been taking a voluntary nap instead of being held prisoner in my own home. I didn't trust myself to speak. If I opened my mouth, I might scream, and I refused to give her that satisfaction. "The donation people were so grateful," she continued, stepping into my room uninvited. "They said the items would really help families in need. Isn't that wonderful? Your old things will actually serve a purpose now." She walked over to my dresser and began opening drawers, peering inside with the casual invasion of privacy that had become her signature move. "I think we made excellent progress today, though there's still so much more we could clear out." Her fingers trailed over the few remaining photographs I'd managed to keep on my nightstand, Pictures of Marcus as a child, of Harold in his army uniform, of my parents on their wedding day. The threat was clear. These could disappear just as easily as everything else had. "You can't do this," I said finally, my voice hoarse from hours of not speaking. "Marcus will never forgive you when he finds out what you've done." Veronica laughed, a sound like breaking crystal. "Marcus won't find out unless you tell him. And honestly, Winnie, who do you think he's going to believe? His loving wife who's trying to help his mother live more simply? Or his confused elderly mother who's clearly struggling with the normal challenges of aging?" The word confused hit me like a physical blow. She was already laying the groundwork for her defense, painting me as mentally incompetent so that anything I said would be dismissed as the ramblings of an old woman losing her grip on reality. "I'm not confused," I said, but even to my own ears, my voice sounded weak and uncertain. "Of course not," she said with false sympathy. "But you have to understand how this looks from the outside. An elderly woman living alone, refusing help, clinging to possessions she doesn't really need. The family has to step in sometimes. It's for your own good. For my own good." The phrase made my stomach turn. How many elderly people had heard those exact words before being stripped of their autonomy, their dignity, their right to make decisions about their own lives? "Marcus will see through this," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure I believed it anymore. My son had been so wrapped up in his new marriage, so eager to please his young wife, that he'd been blind to the gradual erosion of my place in this family. "Marcus trusts me," Veronica said simply. "He loves me. And he wants me to be happy." She moved closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Do you really want to be the mother-in-law who comes between a man and his wife? Do you want to be the bitter old woman who can't accept that her son has moved on with his life?" The manipulation was so skillful, so perfectly crafted, that I almost felt myself believing it. Maybe I was being unreasonable. Maybe I was clinging too tightly to the past. Maybe this beautiful young woman really was just trying to help, and I was too proud and stubborn to see it. But then I remembered the satisfaction in her eyes when she'd locked me in this room. I remembered the casual cruelty with which she'd arranged for my belongings to be taken away, and I knew that this wasn't about helping me at all. This was about erasing me. "I'll be making dinner soon," she said, stepping back and smoothing down her blouse. "Why don't you freshen up and come downstairs? Marcus should be home within the hour, and I'd hate for him to see you looking so disheveled." The words stung because I knew it was true. Hours of captivity had left my hair messed and my clothes wrinkled. I looked exactly like what she wanted me to look like, a confused old woman who couldn't take care of herself. After she left, closing the door behind her but not locking it this time, I sat in the growing darkness of my room and tried to figure out what to do next. I could confront Marcus when he got home, but Veronica was right about one thing. He would probably believe her version of events over mine. She was already framing me as mentally unstable, and my emotional state would only support her narrative. Or I could bide my time, wait for the right moment, and then show them all exactly what Winifred Scott was capable of. I stood up slowly, my joints protesting after hours of sitting, and walked over to my closet. To anyone else, it would look like a perfectly ordinary closet filled with perfectly ordinary clothes. But Harold had been a man who believed in being prepared for anything, and the false wall he'd installed at the back of this space contained something that would solve all of my problems in one devastating stroke. Tomorrow, I decided, Veronica was going to learn that locking me away had been the biggest mistake of her life. But first, I had to survive dinner with my son and his wife, pretending that everything was normal, while my heart burned with the knowledge of what had been taken from me. I had to sit at the table in my own house and watch Veronica play the role of the caring daughter-in-law, while I played the role of the grateful mother. I could do it, though. I'd been playing roles my entire life. The dutiful daughter, the supportive wife, the sacrificing mother. What was one more performance? As I changed my clothes and tried to make myself presentable, I caught sight of my reflection in the dresser mirror. My face looked older than it had this morning, worn down by the day's humiliations. But my eyes still held fire. Veronica thought she'd broken me today. She thought she'd established her dominance once and for all. She had no idea what was coming. Dinner that night was a masterclass in deception. I sat at the mahogany dining table that Harold and I had purchased for our 10th anniversary, watching Veronica serve Marcus his favorite pot roast, while she regaled him with stories of her productive day. She'd changed into a flowing sundress that made her look younger and more innocent, her hair falling in soft waves around her shoulders as she played the perfect wife. "You should have seen how organized everything looks now," she was saying, her voice bright with manufactured enthusiasm. "I finally convinced your mother to donate some of her old things to charity." The guest room looks so much more spacious. Marcus looked up from his plate, his tired eyes focusing on me for the first time since he'd walked through the door. At 42, my son still carried traces of the little boy I'd raised, but the stress of his job and the demands of his new marriage had aged him in ways that broke my heart. "That's great, Mom," he said, and I could hear the relief in his voice. "I've been worried about you keeping too much stuff. It's not healthy to hold on to things you don't need." The words stung more than I'd expected. My own son, talking about my possessions like they were symptoms of some psychological disorder. I wondered if Veronica had been planting these seeds for months, slowly convincing him that my attachment to my memories was pathological rather than natural. "Veronica was very helpful," I managed to say, my voice steady despite the fury burning in my chest. "She made sure everything went to people who could use it." Marcus smiled, reaching over to squeeze his wife's hand. "See? I told you Mom would come around once she understood. You have such a gift for helping people see reason." Veronica beamed at the praise, her fingers intertwining with his in a display of marital bliss that made my stomach turn. "I just want what's best for the family," she said sweetly. "Sometimes it takes a fresh perspective to see what really matters." "What really matters?" I wanted to laugh at the irony. This woman who had known my son for less than 2 years was lecturing me about family priorities while systematically erasing every trace of the family I'd spent decades building. "What kinds of things did you donate?" Marcus asked, cutting another bite of roast. "I hope you kept the important stuff." Important stuff. I wondered what he would consider important. The photo albums documenting his entire childhood? The Christmas ornaments we'd collected over 35 years? The love letters his father had written me during his deployment overseas? "Oh, just clothes and books mostly," Veronica said with a dismissive wave. "Things that were taking up space without serving any real purpose. Your mother was very reasonable about it all." The lie rolled off her tongue so smoothly that I almost believed it myself. If I hadn't lived through the actual events of the day, I might have thought I really had participated in some kind of collaborative decluttering project. "I saved everything that had sentimental value," she continued, her eyes meeting mine across the table with a look that dared me to contradict her. "I would never get rid of anything truly meaningful." Marcus nodded approvingly, completely oblivious to the subtext passing between his wife and his mother. "That's perfect. Mom, I'm proud of you for taking this step. It shows real maturity." Maturity. As if my 73 years on this earth hadn't already demonstrated sufficient maturity. As if the lifetime I'd spent raising him, supporting him, and sacrificing for him wasn't evidence enough of my ability to make sound decisions. "Your mother was telling me earlier that she's been thinking about other changes too," Veronica said, her tone conversational but her eyes sharp as a blade. "Weren't you, Winnie?" I gripped my fork tighter, understanding that this was another test. She was giving me the opportunity to play along with whatever narrative she was constructing, or to resist and risk looking difficult in front of my son. "I'm always open to new ideas," I said carefully. "She mentioned that the guest room might be too much space for one person," Veronica continued, her smile never wavering. "Maybe something smaller would be more manageable." Marcus looked between us, his brow furrowing slightly. "Are you talking about moving to a different room in the house? Or—" He trailed off, clearly unsure where this conversation was heading. "Oh, we haven't decided anything yet," Veronica said quickly. "It's just something to think about. I found some lovely brochures for senior living communities today. Very nice places, with activities and medical care on site. Senior living communities." The euphemism hit me like a physical blow. She wasn't just talking about moving me to a smaller room. She was talking about moving me out of the house entirely. "Mom?" Marcus was looking at me now, concern creeping into his voice. "Is this something you want to consider?" I felt trapped between two impossible choices. If I said yes, I'd be agreeing to my own exile. If I said no, I'd look stubborn and unreasonable, especially after Veronica had just praised my supposed cooperation with the donation project. I think it's important to plan for the future, I said finally, hating how diplomatic I sounded. But I'm not ready to make any major decisions right now. Veronica's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Of course not. These things take time. But it's good to start thinking about them, don't you agree, Marcus? My son nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. It might not be a bad idea to look at some options. Not to make any decisions now, but just to see what's available. Some of those places are really nice, Mom. They have activities, other people your age to socialize with, other people my age. The phrase made me feel ancient, as if I'd already outlived my usefulness and needed to be warehoused with my contemporaries, until death mercifully ended the inconvenience of my existence. I'm perfectly capable of socializing right here, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. Marcus held up his hands in a placating gesture. I know you are, Mom. I just meant that it might be nice to have more options, that's all. Your mother has been feeling a bit isolated lately, Veronica added helpfully. Haven't you, Winnie? Sometimes I think this big house gets lonely with just the three of us rattling around in it. Isolated. Lonely. She was painting a picture of a sad, withdrawn old woman who would benefit from the company and structure of an institutional setting. The fact that any isolation I felt was largely due to her own hostility was conveniently omitted from this narrative. I've lived in this house for 35 years, I said quietly. It's never felt too big before. But things change, Veronica said gently, as if she were explaining something obvious to a child. What felt right when Harold was alive might not feel right anymore. And now that Marcus and I are starting our lives together, well, it's natural that the family dynamic would shift. Starting their lives together. As if Marcus hadn't already lived 42 years. As if the family he'd been born into was somehow less legitimate than the family he'd created through marriage. The important thing is that we all want what's best for everyone, Marcus said, clearly trying to smooth over the tension he could sense but not quite understand. Nobody's making any decisions tonight. We're just talking. Just talking. But I knew how these conversations worked. First came the reasonable discussion about future planning. Then came the gentle suggestions about touring facilities. Then came the insistence that it was really for the best. And finally came the fait accompli when I found myself signing papers I didn't fully understand. I'd seen it happen to other women my age. Good women who'd raised families and managed households and contributed to their communities, only to find themselves sidelined when they became inconvenient to the next generation. Women who'd been convinced that giving up their independence was somehow a gift to their children, a way of removing the burden of their care. I think I'll go to bed early tonight, I said, standing up from the table before I said something I couldn't take back. It's been a long day. Of course, Veronica said sympathetically. All that organizing can be exhausting. Sleep well. As I climbed the stairs to my small bedroom, I could hear them talking in low voices at the dining table. I couldn't make out the words, but I could guess the content. Veronica was probably expressing concern about my mental state, my ability to live independently, my growing resistance to reasonable suggestions. Marcus was probably nodding along, grateful to have a wife who cared so much about his difficult mother. By the time I closed my bedroom door behind me, I felt as though I were disappearing piece by piece. My belongings were gone. My space in the house was shrinking. My role in my son's life was being systematically diminished. Soon, I would be nothing but a problem to be solved, an obstacle to be removed. But as I sat on my narrow bed in the gathering darkness, I thought about the secret that Harold had left me. The insurance policy that neither Marcus nor Veronica knew existed. The trump card that would change everything if I could just find the courage to play it. Harold had always been a careful man, someone who planned for every contingency. When he'd installed the false wall in our bedroom closet 20 years ago, I'd assumed it was just another one of his quirky home improvement projects. He'd always been tinkering with something, adding hidden storage spaces and secret compartments like a child playing at being a spy. But this particular project had been different. More secretive. More serious. He'd worked on it at night when he thought I was asleep, and he'd made me promise never to tell anyone about it, not even Marcus. "This is for you, Winnie," he'd told me the night he'd finished it. "Just in case something happens to me and you need options. Options." At the time, I'd thought he was being overly dramatic. We had a will, life insurance, a modest savings account. What other options could I possibly need? Now I understood. Harold had seen something in Marcus that I'd been too blind to recognize. A weakness. A tendency to be influenced by the wrong people. He'd known that good intentions weren't always enough to protect the people you loved. The space behind the false wall contained something that would solve every problem Veronica thought she was creating for me. But using it would mean crossing a line I wasn't sure I was ready to cross. It would mean admitting that my son's love wasn't enough to protect me. That family loyalty was a luxury I could no longer afford. I spent most of that night lying awake, staring at the ceiling and listening to the sounds of the house settling around me. Somewhere down the hall, Marcus and Veronica were sleeping in the master bedroom that had once been mine and Harold's. The room where my husband had died, where I'd held his hand and promised to take care of everything he was leaving behind. I'd kept that promise for 5 years, maintaining the house and the garden, managing the finances, preserving the life we'd built together. But I was losing the battle now, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could hold on. When morning came, I got dressed slowly and carefully, choosing clothes that made me look competent and alert. Today was going to be different. Today, I was going to stop being a victim and start being a woman with options. Marcus had already left for work by the time I made it downstairs. But Veronica was in the kitchen, sipping coffee and scrolling through her phone. She looked up when I entered, her expression carefully neutral. "Good morning, Winnie. How did you sleep?" "Very well, thank you." I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat down at the breakfast table, trying to project an air of calm confidence. "I've been thinking about our conversation last night." Her eyes sharpened with interest. "Oh? About the senior living communities?" "Among other things." I took a sip of coffee, buying myself time to choose my words carefully. "You're right that it's important to plan for the future. I realize I may have been resistant to change." Veronica's smile was triumphant but controlled. "I'm so glad you're being open-minded about this. It really is for the best." "I'd like to see those brochures you mentioned," I continued, "and maybe we could schedule some tours. I want to make an informed decision." "Of course." Quote. Veronica's enthusiasm was barely contained. "I think you'll be pleasantly surprised by how nice these places are. Much more luxurious than the old-fashioned nursing homes people think of." Nursing homes. She'd let the mask slip just enough to reveal what she really thought this was about, warehousing me somewhere out of sight and out of mind. "Before we start looking at external options, though," I said carefully, "I wonder if there might be other solutions. Ways to make this house work better for all of us." "What do you mean?" I set down my coffee cup and looked directly at her. "Well, if the issue is space and privacy for newlyweds, perhaps we could make some modifications to the house itself. Renovations that would give everyone what they need." Veronica frowned slightly. "What kind of renovations?" "I've been thinking about converting the basement into a separate living space. A mother-in-law suite, if you will. Complete with its own entrance, kitchen, and bathroom. That way I could maintain my independence while still being close to family." It was a reasonable suggestion, the kind of compromise that a caring family might actually consider. But I could see immediately that Veronica had no interest in keeping me close in any capacity. "I don't think that would work," she said quickly. "The basement gets damp, and with your arthritis, it wouldn't be healthy for you to be down there." "We could address the moisture issues," I said mildly. "Harold always talked about finishing the basement. It might be the perfect time to finally do it." "The cost would be enormous," Veronica said, her voice taking on an edge of frustration. "Much more expensive than finding you a nice place that's already set up for your needs." My needs. Always my needs, never her preferences. Never her desire to have me out of the picture entirely. "Cost isn't necessarily a problem," I said quietly. Harold left me with more resources than you might realize. That got her attention. Veronica's eyes narrowed slightly as she tried to calculate what I might be implying. She knew about Harold's life insurance and our savings account. Marcus had probably told her about those when they were planning their future together. But there was clearly something in my tone that suggested additional resources. "What kind of resources?" she asked, trying to sound casual. I smiled mysteriously. Let's just say that Harold was a man who believed in being prepared. He made sure I would have options if I ever needed them. It wasn't technically a lie. Harold had left me with options, just not the kind that Veronica was imagining. But I could see the wheels turning in her head, trying to figure out what I might be hiding. "Well," she said finally, "even if money weren't an issue, I still think it would be better for you to be around people your own age. The social aspect is so important for mental health." Mental health. There it was again, the subtle suggestion that my preference for staying in my own home was somehow psychologically unhealthy. "You may be right," I said agreeably, "but I'd like to explore all the options before making such a big decision. After all, this is the only home Marcus has ever known. It would be a shame to make changes too hastily." I could see that my reasonableness was frustrating her. She'd been prepared for resistance, for emotional outbursts that would support her narrative about my declining mental state. My calm consideration of alternatives was throwing off her script. "Of course," she said stiffly, "we should definitely look at all the options." Wonderful. In the meantime, I hope you won't mind if I spend some time going through Harold's old papers. If we're going to be making major financial decisions, I should probably review all of our assets. The suggestion clearly made her uncomfortable, though she tried to hide it. I'm sure Marcus could help you with that. Financial planning can be complicated. "Oh, I think I can manage," I said with a gentle smile. "I've been handling our finances for 47 years. Harold always said I had a better head for numbers than he did." That was true, actually. Harold had been brilliant in many ways, but money management wasn't one of his strengths. I'd been the one to track our investments, plan our budget, and make sure we were prepared for retirement. The idea that I suddenly needed my son's help to understand my own financial situation was insulting. "Well, just don't overwhelm yourself," Veronica said, clearly grasping for some way to maintain control of the situation. "Maybe I could help you organize the paperwork. Make sure you don't miss anything important." "That's very kind of you to offer," I said, "but I wouldn't want to burden you with such tedious work. I know how busy you are with your own projects." Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She wasn't used to being politely dismissed, especially by someone she'd already written off as a non-threat. "I should get started," I said, standing up from the table. "There's quite a lot to go through, and I want to be thorough." As I walked toward the stairs, I could feel her eyes boring into my back. She was trying to figure out what had changed, why the defeated old woman from yesterday had suddenly developed a backbone. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that I'd spent the entire night thinking about Harold's final gift to me. The secret he'd hidden away for exactly this kind of situation. The insurance policy that would change everything. I climbed the stairs to my bedroom and closed the door behind me, turning the lock that Harold had installed on all the interior doors. Veronica might control most of this house now, but she didn't control everything. Not yet. My hands shook slightly as I opened my closet and began moving the clothes aside. The false wall that Harold had built looked exactly like the rest of the closet's back panel, smooth white paint over what appeared to be solid drywall. But I knew that if I pressed in exactly the right spot, the hidden catch would release. Harold had shown me the mechanism only once, making me practice until I could find it even in the dark. At the time, I'd thought he was being paranoid. Now I understood that he'd been protecting me. The panels slid aside silently, revealing a space about 2 feet wide and 3 feet deep. Inside was a small safe that Harold had bolted to the wall studs, along with several file folders and a letter addressed to me in his careful handwriting. I'd read the letter once, right after his funeral, and then sealed it away with everything else. The pain of losing him had been too fresh, too overwhelming for me to fully process what he was trying to tell me. But now, 5 years later, I understood every word. "My darling Winnie," the letter began, "if you're reading this, then something has happened to me and you're facing troubles I hoped you'd never have to face. I know you think I'm being overly cautious with all this cloak and dagger business, but I've seen what happens to women our age when they're not prepared for the worst." The letter went on to explain the contents of the safe and the files, but it was the final paragraph that had stuck with me through all these years. "Don't let anyone make you feel like you're a burden or a problem to be solved. You're a strong, intelligent woman who deserves respect and dignity. If Marcus ever forgets that, if anyone ever tries to push you aside or make you feel worthless, you have the power to remind them exactly who they're dealing with. Use it if you have to, sweetheart. Don't let them take away everything we built together." I opened the safe with the combination Harold had made me memorize: our anniversary date, followed by Marcus's birthday. Inside were documents I'd never fully examined, bank statements from accounts I didn't know existed, and investment records that made my heart race. Harold hadn't just been careful with money, he'd been brilliant. While I'd been managing our day-to-day expenses and keeping track of our modest savings, he'd been quietly building a portfolio that would have shocked me if I'd known about it during his lifetime. Real estate investments, stock certificates, bonds, gold coins, and something that made my breath catch in my throat: the deed to our house, with both our names on it as joint owners with rights of survivorship. That meant when Harold died, I'd become the sole owner of the property, regardless of what Marcus or anyone else might think. There were other properties too, rental homes in different states that generated monthly income I'd never seen, because Harold had arranged for all the profits to be reinvested automatically. A safety net he'd built without ever telling me, because he'd known I would have insisted we use the money for Marcus's education or home improvements or any of 1,000 other immediate needs. But the most shocking discovery was a thick folder labeled Veronica Adams in Harold's handwriting. Inside were private investigator reports, background checks, and financial records dating back to before she'd ever met Marcus. Harold had been investigating my future daughter-in-law before I'd even known she existed. The reports painted a picture of a woman who'd made a career out of targeting older, wealthy men. 2 previous marriages to men more than 20 years her senior, both ending in divorce settlements that had left her ex-husbands financially devastated. A pattern of expensive tastes, mounting debts, and a talent for manipulation that had served her well in her chosen profession. One of the reports included a photograph of Veronica at a charity gala, her arm linked with a man who looked disturbingly similar to Marcus: successful, middle-aged, recently divorced, and clearly smitten with his beautiful young companion. The man's name was Richard Caldwell, and according to the investigator's notes, he'd committed suicide 6 months after their divorce was finalized, unable to cope with losing everything he'd worked his entire life to build. I sat on my bedroom floor, surrounded by evidence of my husband's prescience and my own naivete. Harold had seen what was coming and had tried to prepare me for it, but I'd been too grief-stricken and too trusting to pay attention. Now I understood why he'd insisted on the false wall, the hidden safe, the secret accounts. He'd known that someday I might need to fight for my survival, and he'd given me the weapons to win. Veronica thought she was playing chess with a helpless old woman who had no moves left. She had no idea that she'd been in checkmate from the moment she'd walked into this house. I carefully photographed every document with my phone, uploaded them to a secure cloud storage account Harold had set up for me, and then returned everything to the safe. The false wall slid back into place seamlessly, leaving no trace that it had ever been disturbed. For the rest of the morning, I sat in my room planning my next moves. Veronica had made it clear that she wanted me gone, and she wasn't going to stop until she'd achieved that goal. But now I had the resources to fight back, and more importantly, I had information that would change everything. When lunchtime came, I made my way downstairs to find Veronica in the living room, talking animatedly on her phone. She held up one finger when she saw me, indicating that I should wait while she finished her conversation. No, that won't work," she was saying. "It needs to be sooner than that. Can't you make an exception?" She listened for a moment, then sighed dramatically. "Fine, but I'm telling you, every day we wait makes this more complicated." She hung up and turned to me with a bright smile that didn't reach her eyes. Sorry about that. Just trying to coordinate some logistics. No problem, I said pleasantly. I hope everything's working out the way you want it to. Something in my tone made her look at me more carefully. Are you feeling all right, Winnie? You seem different today. Just clearer about things, I said with a smile of my own. Sometimes a good night's sleep makes all the difference. That's wonderful. And did you have a chance to look through those financial papers you mentioned? I did, actually. Very enlightening. I paused, letting her wonder what I might have discovered. I think it's time Marcus and I had a serious conversation about our family's future. What kind of conversation? The kind that should probably wait until he gets home. Family business, you understand. Veronica's smile faltered slightly. Of course. Though I hope you know that I consider myself part of the family now. Marcus and I don't keep secrets from each other. Oh, I'm sure you don't, I said warmly. In fact, I'm counting on that. The rest of the afternoon passed quietly, but I could sense Veronica's growing anxiety. She kept finding excuses to check on me, clearly trying to figure out what I might be planning. When Marcus finally came home that evening, she was practically vibrating with nervous energy. How was your day, honey? She asked him, her voice a little too bright. Your mother mentioned wanting to have a family discussion tonight. Marcus looked tired but curious. What kind of discussion, Mom? Why don't we sit down in the living room? I suggested. I have some things to share with both of you. As we settled into the furniture that Veronica had chosen to replace the pieces Harold and I had selected together, I felt a calm determination settle over me. This was the moment when everything would change, when the balance of power in this house would shift permanently. Veronica perched on the edge of the sofa next to Marcus, her body language tense and alert. She knew something was coming, but she had no idea what. I've been doing some thinking since our conversation last night, I began, my voice steady and confident. About my future, about this family's future, and about some things that I think both of you need to know. Marcus leaned forward, his expression attentive. What kinds of things? I smiled at my son, the boy I'd raised to be honest and decent, the man I still loved despite everything that had happened. Things about your father, about our finances, and about some interesting information I discovered today. Veronica's face had gone pale, but she was trying to maintain her composure. What kind of information? The kind that changes everything, I said simply. The kind that your father left for me to find when I needed it most. And then I told them exactly what Harold had discovered about the woman who was sitting in our living room, wearing our family's name, and planning to destroy everything we'd built together. The silence that followed was deafening. The first photograph I placed on the coffee table showed Veronica at a charity gala, her arm wrapped around a distinguished-looking man with silver hair and kind eyes. She wore the same predatory smile I'd seen countless times, but in this picture it was directed at someone else's husband. This is Richard Caldwell, I said quietly, watching as both Marcus and Veronica stared at the image. He was 63 when this photo was taken. Married for 35 years, 3 children, successful architectural firm. Veronica divorced him 18 months later and took half of everything he'd spent his lifetime building. Marcus picked up the photograph, his hands trembling slightly. Mom, what is this? Where did you get this? Your father left it for me, I said, placing a second photograph on the table. This one showed Veronica in a wedding dress, beaming at a different man, someone younger, but with the same look of wealthy vulnerability that seemed to be her type. This is James Morrison, married to Veronica for 14 months before she filed for divorce. He lost his family business in the settlement. Veronica finally found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. Those pictures don't mean anything. People get divorced all the time. You're absolutely right, I agreed, setting down a thick manila folder. People do get divorced. But most people don't make a career out of it. I opened the folder and began spreading out documents like playing cards. Bank records showing large deposits into your account immediately following each divorce settlement. credit reports showing massive debts that were magically paid off after each marriage ended. And this. I placed a final photograph on the table, and Veronica made a sound like a wounded animal. It showed her leaving what was clearly a lawyer's office, a triumphant smile on her face as she clutched a check. In the background, barely visible through the office window, sat Richard Caldwell with his head in his hands. "He killed himself 6 months after this picture was taken," I said, my voice soft but relentless. "Couldn't live with what he'd lost. Not just the money, but his children's respect, his friends' trust, his sense of self-worth. Your father found the obituary and included it in his files." Marcus was staring at his wife as if he'd never seen her before. "Veronica, please tell me this isn't what it looks like." "It's not," she said quickly, but her voice lacked conviction. "Marcus, you have to understand. Those marriages were mistakes. I was young and confused, and I got involved with men who weren't right for me." "3 times?" I asked mildly. "You made the same mistake 3 times, always with older wealthy men, always ending in profitable divorces?" "People change," she insisted, reaching for Marcus's hand, but he pulled away. "What I felt for those men wasn't real. What I feel for you is different." I almost felt sorry for her then. Almost. But then I remembered the satisfaction in her eyes when she'd locked me in my room, the casual cruelty with which she'd arranged for my belongings to be stolen, and my sympathy evaporated like morning mist. "Your father was very thorough in his investigation," I continued, pulling out another set of documents. "He found records of the private detective you hired to research our family's finances before you ever agreed to that first date with Marcus." "That's not true," Veronica said, but her face had gone white. "Detective Raymond Walsh, licensed investigator in 3 states," I read from the invoice. "Services rendered. Comprehensive background check on Marcus Andrew Scott, including employment history, property ownership, investment portfolio, and family financial status. Amount paid, $1,500. Date of service, 2 weeks before you supposedly met Marcus by chance at that coffee shop." Marcus was on his feet now, pacing across the living room like a caged animal. "You had me investigated? Before we even met?" "Marcus, please, let me explain." "Explain what?" His voice was getting louder, years of suppressed doubt finally finding their voice. "Explain how you happened to bump into me at the exact coffee shop I go to every Tuesday morning. Explain how you just happen to love all the same books I mentioned in my online dating profile. Explain how you knew my mother's maiden name before I told you." "I needed to be sure you were a good man," Veronica said desperately. "After what I'd been through with my previous marriages, I couldn't afford to make another mistake." "Your previous mistakes made you rich," I pointed out. "According to these financial records, you collected over $3 million in divorce settlements. That's quite a successful run of mistakes." The number hung in the air like a physical presence. Marcus stopped pacing and turned to stare at his wife, his face a mask of betrayal and disbelief. $3 million, he repeated slowly. "And you told me you were struggling financially when we met. You said you needed help with rent, with car payments." "I did need help," Veronica said, her composure finally beginning to crack. "The money was tied up in investments, and I was having cash flow problems." "Show me," Marcus said flatly. "What?" "Show me these investments. Show me where this $3 million went. Because according to Mom's papers, you've been living beyond your means for years, accumulating debt, spending money you don't have." His voice was cold now, analytical. "Show me one investment account, one savings statement, one piece of evidence that you have any money left from these quote settlements." Veronica opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again. For the first time since I'd known her, she had no ready lie, no smooth explanation. "You spent it all, didn't you?" Marcus continued. "Cars, clothes, jewelry, trips. You burned through $3 million and came looking for the next mark." "Don't say that," she whispered. "Marcus, I love you. I really do love you. Do you?" He pulled out his phone and began scrolling through something. "Because according to this text message you sent to someone named Diana last week, you're just waiting for the right moment to make your move on the old lady's house." My blood turned to ice. You were monitoring her phone? I installed a family tracking app last month, Marcus said, not taking his eyes off Veronica. For safety, I thought. But it also backs up text messages to the cloud. He looked up at his wife, his expression devastated. Did you really think I was that stupid? Veronica was crying now, but they were tears of frustration rather than remorse. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. I have debts, obligations. People who are expecting to be paid. What people? I asked, though I was beginning to suspect I already knew. Investors, she said vaguely. Business partners from my previous ventures. You mean loan sharks? Marcus said grimly. You borrowed against money you didn't have, gambling that you could marry your way out of debt one more time. The picture was becoming clearer, and it was worse than I'd imagined. Veronica wasn't just a gold digger, she was a desperate one, backed into a corner by her own greed and running out of options. How much do you owe? I asked. She was silent for a long moment, staring at her hands. Finally, she whispered, 200,000. Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. $200,000. And your solution was to convince me to put my mother in a nursing home, so we could sell her house. It's not like that, Veronica protested weakly. It's exactly like that, I said firmly. Your father saw this coming from the beginning. That's why he prepared all of this evidence, why he made sure I'd have the resources to fight back when the time came. I reached into the folder one more time and pulled out a legal document that made Veronica gasp audibly. This is the deed to our house, showing that I am the sole legal owner. Harold made sure of that when he updated our will 5 years ago. You can't sell this house, Veronica. You can't force me out of it, and you certainly can't use it as collateral for your gambling debts. That's impossible, she said, snatching the document from my hands. Marcus told me his name was on the deed. I thought it was, Marcus said slowly. Dad always said the house would be mine someday. And it will be, I assured him. But not while I'm still alive to enjoy it. And certainly not while you're married to someone who sees it as nothing more than a commodity to be liquidated. Veronica was studying the deed with desperate intensity, as if she could will it to say something different. When she finally looked up, her carefully maintained mask had slipped completely, revealing the calculating predator underneath. You can't prove any of this, she said, her voice hard now. So what if I researched Marcus before we met? So what if I've been married before? None of that changes the fact that I'm his wife now and I have rights. You're absolutely correct, I said pleasantly. You do have rights. The right to take whatever you brought into this marriage when you leave it. I'm not leaving, she said defiantly. Marcus loves me. Don't you, honey? Marcus was still staring at the photographs scattered across the coffee table, his face a study in betrayal and disillusionment. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. I thought I did, he said, but I don't even know who you are. I'm your wife, Veronica insisted. I'm the woman you fell in love with. No, Marcus said, his voice growing stronger. You're an actress playing a role. And now that I know the script, I can see all the places where you forgot your lines. He stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the garden that Harold and I had planted together 30 years ago. The way you always steered conversations toward money. The way you pushed me to take out that second mortgage. The way you made me feel guilty for wanting to take care of my mother. I was trying to help you see that you had options, Veronica said desperately. That you didn't have to sacrifice your future for the past. My mother isn't the past, Marcus said, turning back to face her. She's the person who raised me, who taught me right from wrong, who sacrificed everything for my future. And you tried to convince me that caring for her was somehow a character flaw. Veronica looked between us, her expression growing more frantic by the moment. Marcus, please. We can work this out. We can find another solution. What solution? He asked coldly. You owe $200,000 to people who presumably aren't known for their patience. You've been lying to me since the day we met. You've been planning to rob my mother of her home, her dignity, her independence. What exactly are we supposed to work out? I can change, she said, but even she didn't sound convinced. Into what? I asked gently. This is who you are, Veronica. This is what you do. You find lonely, trusting people, and you exploit their need for love until there's nothing left to take. She whirled on me, her composure finally shattering completely. You don't know anything about me. You don't know what I've been through, what I've had to do to survive. Survive? Marcus laughed bitterly. You call conning vulnerable people survival? You think it's easy? Veronica shouted. You think I wanted this life? I never had choices like you did, Marcus. I never had parents who loved me unconditionally, or a trust fund to fall back on when things got tough. I don't have a trust fund, Marcus said quietly. But you had security, she shot back. You had a safety net. You had people who believed in you and supported you no matter what. Some of us had to create our own security, make our own opportunities. By destroying other people's families? I asked. By doing whatever it took to survive, she said fiercely. You have no idea what it's like to be completely alone in the world, with no one to depend on but yourself. For a moment, I felt a flicker of sympathy for the young woman she must have been. Scared, alone, convinced that love was just another currency to be traded. But then I thought about Richard Caldwell, about the other men whose lives she'd destroyed, and my sympathy hardened into resolve. Being alone doesn't give you the right to make other people suffer for your choices, I said firmly. And it certainly doesn't give you the right to try to steal my home. It's not stealing, Veronica said desperately. It's just repositioning assets. Into your bank account, Marcus said flatly. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of a car pulling into our driveway. Through the window, I could see a black sedan with tinted windows parking behind Veronica's red convertible. Are you expecting someone? Marcus asked. Veronica's face went pale. No, they said they wouldn't come here. Who said they wouldn't come here? I asked, though I was beginning to understand. The doorbell rang, followed by heavy knocking that suggested whoever was outside wasn't planning to leave without getting what they came for. Veronica, a deep voice called through the door. We need to talk. She was shaking now, all pretense of control completely gone. They're not supposed to be here. They promised me another week. Who promised you another week? Marcus demanded. The people I owe money to, she whispered. They must have followed me. They must have been watching the house. The knocking came again, more insistent this time. We know you're in there, Veronica. Open the door. Marcus looked at his wife with disgust. You brought loan sharks to my mother's house? I didn't mean to, she said frantically. They must have been following me. I never told them where I lived. They probably had you followed from the beginning, I said, understanding dawning. They wanted to know exactly what assets they could claim if you defaulted on your payments. The knocking had turned to pounding now, and I could hear multiple voices outside. Whatever Veronica had gotten herself involved with, it was serious enough to warrant sending a team of collectors. We need to call the police, Marcus said, reaching for his phone. No! Veronica grabbed his arm. Please, Marcus, don't. If the police get involved, it will only make things worse. Worse for who? He asked. But I could see the conflict in his eyes. Despite everything she'd done, she was still his wife, and his protective instincts were warring with his anger. Let me handle this, I said, standing up slowly. This is my house, and I won't have thugs terrorizing my family on my doorstep. Mom, no, Marcus said quickly. These aren't the kind of people you reason with. Maybe not, I agreed. But they're also not the kind of people who want to deal with complicated legal situations when there are simpler solutions available. I walked to the front door, ignoring the protests from both Marcus and Veronica. Through the peephole, I could see 3 men in expensive suits standing on my porch. They looked like businessmen except for the way they carried themselves. Alert, dangerous, used to getting what they wanted through intimidation. I opened the door but kept the security chain engaged, creating a small gap that allowed me to speak while maintaining some protection. Gentlemen, I said politely, how can I help you? The man in front was tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of face that suggested he'd been in his share of unpleasant conversations. We're looking for Veronica Adams, he said. We have business to discuss. She's not available at the moment, I replied calmly. Perhaps you could make an appointment. The man smiled, but there was no warmth in it. I don't think you understand, ma'am. This isn't the kind of business that waits for appointments. I understand perfectly, I said. But this is my home, and I don't conduct business with people who show up uninvited and start making demands. Mrs. Scott? The man knew my name, which meant they'd done their homework. We're not here to cause trouble for you or your family. We just need to collect what we're owed. And what exactly are you owed? $200,000 plus interest and fees. Call it $250, round numbers. I nodded thoughtfully. That's a substantial amount. I assume you have documentation of this debt? The man looked surprised by my businesslike tone. We have contracts, payment schedules, everything legal and proper. Of course you do, I said. And I assume these contracts list specific collateral that can be claimed if the debt isn't paid. The debtor's assets, yes, ma'am. Whatever it takes to satisfy the obligation. I see. And have you verified what assets the debtor actually owns? Now he looked confused. Ma'am, I'm not sure what you're getting at. I'm getting at the fact that Veronica Adams has no assets, I said matter-of-factly. She owns no property, has no savings, no investments, no income beyond what my son provides her as his wife. If you're expecting to collect $250,000 from her, I'm afraid you're going to be disappointed. Behind me, I could hear Veronica making small sounds of panic, but I ignored her. She told us about this house, the man said, his voice taking on an edge. Said it would be part of the collateral. This house belongs to me, I said firmly, and it will continue to belong to me until the day I die. Even if my son were to divorce his wife tomorrow, she would have no claim on this property whatsoever. I could see the wheels turning in the man's head as he processed this information. Loan sharks might be criminals, but they were also businessmen. They didn't stay in business by pursuing debts that couldn't be collected. Are you telling me this woman borrowed money she had no way to pay back? He asked. I'm telling you that if you want to collect your debt, you're going to need to find a different source of payment. This house isn't available, and neither are any of my family's assets. The man turned to confer with his companions in low voices. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but their body language suggested frustration and growing anger. Ma'am, the leader said finally, we appreciate your honesty, but we still have a problem to solve. Indeed you do, I agreed, though I might have a suggestion. We're listening. I took a deep breath, preparing to play the most important card in my hand. How would you feel about accepting payment in gold? The silence that followed was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat. Behind me, both Marcus and Veronica had gone completely still. What kind of gold? The man asked carefully. The kind that's been appreciating in value for 20 years, I said. The kind that my late husband accumulated as insurance against exactly this type of situation. How much gold are we talking about? I smiled, feeling the balance of power shift completely in my favor. Enough to settle your debt and leave change for your trouble. Assuming, of course, that you're willing to consider this matter closed once payment is made. The man's eyes lit up with interest. Gold was portable, untraceable, and infinitely more valuable than the theoretical claim on a house he couldn't actually touch. We'd need to verify the gold's authenticity, he said. Of course. I wouldn't expect you to take my word for it. And we'd need assurance that once we accept payment, the debtor won't be our problem anymore. I glanced back at Veronica, who was staring at me with a mixture of shock and desperate hope. Oh, I think I can guarantee that she won't be anyone's problem much longer. The man nodded slowly. We'll need to see this gold before we agree to anything. Naturally. Give me 10 minutes to retrieve it from my safe. I closed the door and turned to face my son and his wife. Marcus was looking at me as if I'd just sprouted wings, while Veronica appeared to be in shock. Mom, Marcus said slowly. What gold? The gold your father spent 20 years accumulating, I said, walking toward the stairs. The insurance policy he left me for exactly this situation. You're going to pay off her debt? Marcus sounded incredulous. I'm going to buy her freedom, I corrected, and ours. These men won't just disappear if we ignore them. They'll keep coming back. escalating the pressure until someone gets hurt. This way, everyone gets what they want. I can't let you do this, Veronica said suddenly. It's not your debt. It's not your responsibility. I paused at the bottom of the stairs and looked at her, really looked at her for the first time since she'd entered our lives. Stripped of her arrogance and manipulation, she looked very young and very frightened. No, I said quietly. It's not my responsibility. But it's my choice. Why? She whispered. After everything I've done, why would you help me? I thought about that for a moment, considering all the reasons I could give her. Because I didn't want these men terrorizing my family. Because I wanted her out of our lives as quickly and cleanly as possible. Because the gold was just sitting in a safe where it wasn't helping anyone. But the real reason was simpler and more complicated than any of those. Because someone needs to break the cycle, I said finally. Because if you keep running from debt to debt, marriage to marriage, you're going to end up dead or in prison. And because despite everything you've done, I don't want that on my conscience. Tears were streaming down her face now, and for the first time since I'd known her, they looked genuine. I don't deserve this, she said. No, I agreed. You don't. But sometimes grace isn't about what we deserve. I climbed the stairs to my bedroom, leaving Marcus and Veronica to process what was about to happen. In my closet, I opened the false wall one more time and retrieved the wooden box that contained Harold's insurance policy. 20 years of gold coins, each one purchased during times when the economy was uncertain and traditional investments seemed risky. Harold had never touched them, never even mentioned them to Marcus, because he'd understood that they weren't really about money at all. They were about freedom. The freedom to make choices without being backed into a corner. The freedom to help someone else make better choices. The freedom to end a cycle of predation and victimization that had been going on for far too long. When I came back downstairs carrying the wooden box, both Marcus and Veronica stared at it, as if it contained nuclear weapons. How much is in there? Marcus asked. Enough, I said simply. More than enough. I opened the front door, where the 3 men were waiting with barely concealed impatience. Gentlemen, I said, let's settle this debt once and for all. The weight of the wooden box in my hands felt like carrying 20 years of Harold's foresight and love. Each gold coin inside represented a choice he'd made to protect me from a future he'd hoped would never come. Now, standing in my own doorway with 3 dangerous men waiting on my porch, I understood the full magnitude of his gift. The leader of the group, who had introduced himself simply as Vincent, examined each coin with a jeweler's loupe while his companions maintained their watchful silence. The late afternoon sun caught the gold surface, sending warm reflections dancing across his weathered face as he verified authenticity, weight, and current market value. These are pristine, he said after examining the 5th coin. Museum quality. Your husband knew what he was doing. Harold was a careful man, I replied, watching as Vincent continued his methodical assessment. Behind me, I could feel Marcus and Veronica hovering in the doorway, both of them still struggling to process the reality of what was unfolding. Current spot price puts these at about $1,400 each, Vincent continued, his tone becoming more respectful with each coin he examined. You've got enough here to settle the debt and leave a healthy margin for our trouble. I assumed as much, I said calmly. Harold always believed in being prepared for any contingency. Vincent carefully returned the coins to their protective sleeves and closed the box. Ma'am, I have to say, in 30 years of debt collection, I've never had a situation resolve this cleanly. Most people fight us, try to hide assets, make promises they can't keep. Most people don't have the resources my husband provided, I said. And most people don't understand that sometimes the fastest way to solve a problem is to face it directly. He nodded thoughtfully, then turned his attention to Veronica, who had stepped outside despite Marcus's attempts to keep her in the house. Mrs. Adams, your debt is paid in full. You understand what that means? Veronica nodded mutely, tears still streaming down her face. It means you're free and clear with us, Vincent continued, his voice taking on a warning edge. But it also means you don't get a second chance. If you ever find yourself in a similar situation with our organization, there won't be a generous mother-in-law to bail you out. Are we clear? Crystal clear, Veronica whispered. Vincent turned back to me, extending his hand. Mrs. Scott, it's been a pleasure doing business with you. I hope you never need our services again. I shook his hand firmly. I'm quite certain I won't. As the three men walked back to their car, I felt a strange sense of completion. Harold's contingency plan had worked exactly as he'd intended, protecting our family from a threat he'd foreseen years before it materialized. The gold was gone, but what it had purchased, our safety, our peace of mind, our freedom from Veronica's destructive influence, was worth far more than any precious metal. Mom, Marcus said as we watched the black sedan disappear down our street, I can't believe you just gave away $250,000 in gold to save her. I didn't save her, I corrected gently. I saved us. Those men weren't going to disappear just because we told them Veronica didn't have any money. They would have kept coming back, escalating the pressure until someone got hurt. But still, Marcus protested, it was your security, your nest egg. I smiled at my son, this good man who had been so thoroughly deceived by his wife's manipulations. Marcus, your father left me with far more security than you realize. The gold was just one small part of his preparations. What do you mean? Instead of answering immediately, I turned to Veronica, who was standing on the porch looking lost and broken. We need to talk, I said quietly. All three of us. There are some decisions to be made, and I think we all know what they need to be. Back in the living room, surrounded by the scattered evidence of Veronica's deception, we sat in uncomfortable silence for several minutes. Marcus kept looking between his wife and his mother, as if he were seeing both of us clearly for the first time. Veronica stared at her hands, the fight completely gone out of her. I suppose I should thank you, she said finally, her voice barely audible. You don't need to thank me, I replied. But you do need to understand that this changes everything. I know, she whispered. I know it's over. Marcus flinched at her words, but he didn't contradict them. Veronica, how could you lie to me about everything? About your past, about your debts, about your reasons for marrying me? Because I was scared, she said, looking up at him for the first time since the revelation began. Because I was in so deep that I couldn't see any other way out. But you had to know this would all come out eventually, he said. You had to know I'd find out. I thought I could make it work, she said desperately. I thought if I could just buy enough time, I could find a way to pay off the debts without losing you. By selling my mother's house? Marcus's voice was cold. By convincing me to put her in a nursing home so you could liquidate her assets? I didn't know what else to do, Veronica said, her voice breaking. I was panicking, and I made terrible decisions. I know that doesn't excuse anything, but I need you to understand that the fear made me desperate. Fear doesn't justify what you did, I said firmly. Fear doesn't excuse the way you manipulated my son or the way you tried to destroy my family. I know, she said, tears flowing freely now. I know I can't undo any of it. I know I've lost everything. Not everything, I said quietly. You still have choices to make. You can choose to keep running the same destructive patterns, or you can choose to do something different. Veronica looked at me with surprise. What do you mean? I mean that your debts are paid, your slate is clean, and you have an opportunity to start over. The question is whether you're going to take it or waste it. She can't stay here, Marcus said flatly. I can't live with someone who's been lying to me since the day we met. I understand, Veronica said, her voice steady despite her tears. I wouldn't expect you to. The marriage is over, he continued, as if he needed to say the words out loud to make them real. I'll file for divorce as soon as possible. I won't fight it, Veronica said. I don't deserve anything from you or your family. I watched this exchange with mixed emotions. Part of me felt vindicated that Veronica was finally facing consequences for her actions. But another part of me recognized the genuine despair in her voice, the real remorse that seemed to be emerging now that all her masks had been stripped away. There's something else we need to discuss, I said, pulling out another folder from Harold's collection. Something that might affect how this divorce proceeds. Marcus looked at me warily. What now? Your father didn't just investigate Veronica's past, I said. He also took steps to protect our family's assets from exactly this kind of situation. I opened the folder to reveal a series of legal documents that neither Marcus nor Veronica had ever seen. Prenuptial agreement, I said, placing the first document on the coffee table. Drafted by Harold's attorney and signed by both parties before the marriage. Veronica stared at the papers in shock. That's impossible. I never signed a prenup. Actually, you did, I said gently. Do you remember the papers Marcus asked you to sign the week before your wedding? The ones he said were just formalities for the marriage license? The color drained from her face as understanding dawned. Those weren't marriage license forms. No, Marcus said slowly, his own shock evident. Dad told me they were required documentation. I never read them carefully. I just trusted him to handle the paperwork. Harold was protecting his family, I said. The prenup establishes that in the event of divorce, each party retains only the assets they brought into the marriage. Since you brought no assets, Veronica, you're entitled to no assets. That can't be legal, she protested weakly. I never knew what I was signing. It's perfectly legal, I assured her. Harold had it reviewed by 3 different attorneys to make sure it would hold up in court. He even had video recording of the signing, with you clearly stating that you understood the documents you were executing. The silence that followed was deafening. Veronica sat there processing the reality that even her backup plan, claiming half of Marcus's assets in a divorce, had been anticipated and neutralized years before she'd conceived it. So I get nothing, she said finally. You get your freedom, I corrected, and a chance to build something honest for the first time in your adult life. With what? She asked bitterly. I have no money, no job skills that don't involve manipulating people, nowhere to go. You're intelligent, I said. You're resourceful. You're still young enough to learn legitimate skills and build a legitimate life. You're actually giving me advice? She asked incredulously. After everything I've done to you? I'm giving you the same advice I'd give any woman who found herself in an impossible situation, I said. The cycle of deception and exploitation stops here. You can choose to break it, or you can choose to repeat it. But if you choose to repeat it, you'll do it somewhere else, with someone else's family. Marcus was staring at the prenuptial agreement as if he'd never seen it before. I can't believe Dad planned all this. How did he know what Veronica was before I did? Your father was an excellent judge of character, I said diplomatically, and he'd seen enough of the world to recognize certain patterns. He never trusted her, Marcus realized, not from the beginning. He wanted to trust her, I said gently. He wanted to be wrong about his suspicions. But he wasn't going to risk our family's security on hope alone. So what happens now? Veronica asked, her voice hollow. Now you pack your things and leave. Marcus said firmly. Tonight. Marcus, I said quietly. Perhaps we could be a little more civilized about this. Veronica, you're welcome to stay in the guest room for a few days while you make arrangements. I think we've all had enough drama for one lifetime. Both Marcus and Veronica stared at me in amazement. You're offering to let her stay? Marcus asked. After everything? For a few days, I clarified. Long enough for her to figure out where she's going and how she's getting there. I'm not heartless, Marcus. I just refuse to be taken advantage of. Veronica was crying again, but these tears seemed different somehow. I don't understand you, she said. Why are you being kind to me? Because kindness costs me nothing, I said simply. And because despite everything you've done, I still believe people can change if they want to badly enough. I do want to change, she said desperately. I'm so tired of lying, of scheming, of hurting people. I just don't know how. Start by telling the truth, I suggested, about everything. To yourself, to others, to whoever you meet next. Stop creating elaborate backstories and just be honest about who you are and where you come from. The truth isn't very appealing, she said with a bitter laugh. Nobody wants to marry a gold digger with a history of destroying families. Nobody wants to marry a lie either, Marcus pointed out. At least the truth gives people a real choice about whether to trust you. And what if they choose not to? Then they're not the right people for you, I said. Authentic relationships can only be built on authentic foundations. Over the next 3 days, As Veronica prepared to leave our house and our lives, I watched her go through what seemed like a genuine transformation. Gone was the polished facade, the calculated charm, the constant manipulation. In its place was a broken young woman trying to figure out who she really was underneath all the masks she'd worn. She spent hours on the phone with organizations that helped people find legitimate employment. She researched programs for people trying to rebuild their lives after making destructive choices. She even called her estranged sister in Oregon, a conversation that lasted for hours and ended with tentative plans for reconciliation. "I haven't talked to Jenny in 8 years, she told me the night before she was scheduled to leave. I burned that bridge when I asked her for money to cover gambling debts, and then disappeared when she tried to help me get clean." "What did she say when you called?" "That she'd been waiting for me to be ready to accept real help," Veronica said with a watery smile. "She's offered to let me stay with her while I get back on my feet, but only if I agree to counseling and complete honesty about my past. Are you going to accept?" "I think so. It scares me, being that vulnerable with someone, but I'm more scared of continuing to live the way I have been." "That sounds like wisdom," I said. "I owe you an apology," she said suddenly. "A real one, not like the fake ones I've been giving all my life." "You don't owe me anything." "Yes, I do. I tried to destroy your family. I manipulated your son, tried to steal your home, made you feel unwelcome in your own house. I locked you in a closet like you were some kind of prisoner. The memory of those hours trapped in the guest room closet still made my chest tight with anxiety, but I decided not to let it define this experience." "Why did you do it?" I asked quietly. "Not the manipulation or the lying, but specifically that. Why did you lock me away like that?" Veronica was quiet for a long time, staring at her hands. "Because you represented everything I'd never had," she said finally. "A real family, a real home, unconditional love. When I looked at you, I saw everything I'd convinced myself I didn't need, and it made me furious. So you tried to make me disappear." "I tried to make you small," she corrected. "The way I'd been made to feel small my whole life. It was cruel and petty, and I knew it was wrong even as I was doing it. But you did it anyway." "I did it anyway," she admitted, "because hurting you felt like power, and I'd felt powerless for so long that I'd forgotten how to handle conflict any other way." It wasn't a complete explanation, but it was honest, and that meant something. "I forgive you," I said, and was surprised to realize I meant it. "Why?" "Because holding on to anger would hurt me more than it would hurt you," I said. "And because your father-in-law gave me the tools to protect myself, which means I don't have to carry resentment as protection." Marcus joined us for dinner that final night, and for the first time since the revelations began, we had something approaching a normal conversation. Veronica talked about her plans in Oregon, her hopes for rebuilding her relationship with her sister, her intention to find honest work and honest relationships. "What kind of work are you thinking about?" Marcus asked, and I was pleased to hear genuine curiosity in his voice rather than anger. "Jenny thinks I might be good at social work," Veronica said, "helping other women who've made destructive choices. Apparently, having experience with manipulation and deception could be useful if I'm trying to help people recognize those patterns in their own lives." "That makes sense," he said. "You certainly understand how those cycles work." "From the inside," she agreed. "I know how easy it is to convince yourself that you don't have choices, that the only way to survive is to use other people." "Do you think you can really change?" Marcus asked. "After so many years of living this way?" "I don't know," she said honestly, "but I know I can't keep living the way I have been. If I don't change, I'll end up dead or in prison, just like your mother said." "What made you finally want to try?" Veronica glanced at me, then back at Marcus. "Seeing what real love looks like," she said quietly. "Watching your mother sacrifice her financial security to protect people who had hurt her. Understanding that real strength comes from building things up, not tearing them down." "Mom has always been strong," Marcus said, and the pride in his voice made my heart warm. "I used to think strength meant being able to manipulate people into giving you what you wanted," Veronica said. "But that's not strength, that's just predation. Real strength is what your mother showed me, the ability to be generous even when you have every reason to be vindictive." The next morning, as Veronica loaded her single suitcase into the taxi that would take her to the airport, she turned back to face Marcus and me one final time. "Thank you," she said simply. "Both of you, for giving me a chance to leave with some dignity intact." "Take care of yourself," Marcus said, and I was proud of the kindness in his voice. My son had every right to be bitter, but he was choosing grace instead. "I will," she promised. "And Marcus? I really did love you. Not the way I should have, not honestly, but it was real. I hope someday you can find someone who deserves what you have to offer." After the taxi disappeared around the corner, Marcus and I stood in our driveway in comfortable silence for several minutes. "Are you okay?" he asked finally. "I'm better than okay," I said truthfully. "I'm free." "I'm sorry," he said suddenly. "For everything. For not seeing what she was doing, for not protecting you, for almost letting her take away your home." "You don't need to apologize," I said, linking my arm through his. "You fell in love with someone who wasn't who she pretended to be. That's not a character flaw, that's just being human." "How did Dad know?" Marcus asked as we walked back toward the house. "How did he see what I couldn't?" "Your father had lived longer and seen more," I said diplomatically, "and he wasn't blinded by love the way you were." "Will you tell me about the other things he left?" Marcus asked. "The investments, the properties, all the stuff I never knew about?" "Of course," I said. "But you should know that most of it is set up to provide security, not luxury. Your father wanted to make sure I'd never be dependent on anyone else's generosity. Even mine?" "Especially yours," I said gently. "He loved you deeply, but he also understood that children have their own lives to live. He didn't want me to become a burden to you." "You could never be a burden to me," Marcus said fiercely. "I know that now," I said, "but your father wanted to make sure it would never even be a question." Over the following weeks, as Marcus worked through the divorce proceedings, and I adjusted to having my house back to myself, we began to rebuild our relationship on a more honest foundation. Marcus seemed genuinely remorseful about how easily he'd been manipulated into questioning my competence and independence. I, in turn, worked to forgive both him and myself for the ways we'd all been deceived. The guest room, once the site of my humiliation, became a project room where I sorted through Harold's papers and began to understand the full scope of his preparations. He'd left me with enough resources to live comfortably for the rest of my life, plus enough extra to help Marcus if he ever needed it, and still have something meaningful to leave as a legacy. "Dad was a genius," Marcus said one evening as we reviewed the investment portfolio together. "I had no idea he was this good with money." "He was good with everything that mattered," I said. "Money, planning, protecting the people he loved." "Do you miss him?" "Every day," I said honestly. "But going through all this, seeing how well his plans worked, it feels like he's still taking care of us." "Do you think Veronica will really change?" I considered the question carefully. I think she wants to change, which is more than she had before. Whether she'll follow through, whether she'll do the hard work required to build an honest life, that's up to her. "I hope she does," Marcus said. "For her sake, not mine." "That's very mature of you." "I learned from the best," he said with a smile that reminded me of the little boy who used to climb onto my lap for bedtime stories. 3 months later, I received a postcard from Oregon. On the front was a picture of Mount Hood, and on the back, in Veronica's careful handwriting, were just a few lines. "Working as a receptionist at a women's shelter. Starting college part-time in the fall. Jenny and I are rebuilding our relationship slowly. Thank you for showing me what grace looks like. Nash V." I showed the postcard to Marcus, who read it with a thoughtful expression. "Do you think she means it?" he asked. "I think she's trying," I said. "And sometimes that's enough to start with." "Are you glad you helped her?" I thought about that question as I looked around my living room, now restored to the comfortable warmth I remembered from my years with Harold. The sterile, expensive furniture was gone, replaced with pieces that held memories and meaning. The family photos were back on the mantel. The house felt like home again. Yes, I said finally. I'm glad I broke the cycle instead of perpetuating it. Even though it cost you so much money? The money was just sitting in a safe, I said, using it to protect our family and give someone else a chance at redemption. That seems like exactly what your father would have wanted. That night, as I got ready for bed in my own master bedroom, the room Marcus had immediately insisted I reclaim, I thought about Harold's letter and the promises he'd made me. He'd said I had the power to remind people exactly who they were dealing with if anyone ever tried to push me aside or make me feel worthless. He'd been right, but not in the way I'd expected. My power hadn't come from revenge or retaliation. It had come from refusing to be diminished, from maintaining my dignity in the face of cruelty, and from choosing grace over bitterness when I had the upper hand. The false wall in my closet was empty now, the safe containing only the letter Harold had written and a few family documents. But I didn't feel vulnerable or unprotected. I felt free in a way I hadn't experienced since Harold's death. Free from fear, free from manipulation, free from the need to apologize for taking up space in my own life. 6 months later, Marcus began dating again, a woman his own age who worked as a nurse at the hospital where he sold medical equipment. Sarah was kind, honest, and appropriately impressed by the beautiful home where Marcus had grown up, rather than interested in liquidating it for cash. She's wonderful, I told Marcus after meeting her for the first time. Harold would have liked her. How can you tell? Because she treats you like a partner, not a prize to be won, I said. And because she asked thoughtful questions about our family, instead of trying to impress us with stories about herself. I'm being more careful this time, Marcus said. Taking things slower, really getting to know who she is. That's wisdom, I agreed. Sometimes the best lessons come from the worst experiences. As I write this, it's been nearly 2 years since Veronica left our lives. Marcus and Sarah are engaged, planning a small wedding in our garden next spring. The prenuptial agreement Sarah suggested, a real one this time, negotiated openly and honestly, protects both their interests while still allowing them to build a life together. I've used some of Harold's legacy to establish a foundation that helps elderly people protect themselves from financial exploitation. The irony isn't lost on me that I'm using the money Veronica tried to steal to help other people avoid similar situations. Sometimes I think about that afternoon when Veronica locked me in the closet, how trapped and powerless I felt in that small, dark space. At the time, it felt like the ultimate humiliation, being imprisoned in my own home by someone who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to be removed. Now I understand that Harold had given me the key to a different kind of closet all along. A closet full of options, full of dignity, full of the power to choose grace over revenge, and wisdom over bitterness. Veronica thought she was locking me away from my own life, but she was actually pushing me toward the strength I'd forgotten I possessed. The gold is gone, but what it purchased, our family's peace, our security, our ability to move forward without the weight of unresolved conflict, continues to appreciate and value every day. And sometimes, late at night when the house is quiet and I'm reading in the chair Harold bought me for our 40th anniversary, I can almost feel him smiling at how perfectly his plan worked out. Not just the practical elements, but the deeper wisdom of it. The understanding that true security comes not from hoarding resources, but from having the courage to use them wisely when the moment demands it. I'm 75 now, and I've learned that real wealth isn't measured in gold coins hidden behind false walls. It's measured in dignity maintained, in family protected, in cycles broken, and in grace extended even to those who least deserve it. And that's a treasure that no one can ever lock away from me. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.